So I think most of us have had a buck that we've watched, especially in the summer months, as that buck's in velvet, maybe coming out to a soybean field or an alfalfa field feeding in the evenings. And you know, we're just counting down the days till opening day where we can get out there and hunt that buck. But sometime before opening day, the buck just disappears on us. A lot of times that gets attributed to maybe a changing food source or too much pressure on the property. But I've been running trail cameras in multiple states, dozens of properties for several years. Typically, I'll have anywhere from 40 to 50 trail cameras out on a couple dozen or so properties. And over the last decade or so, I put together a phenomenon, if you will, in buck movement that I shared in an article in North American Whitetail called Homecoming Bucks. If you've ever hunted one of those bucks that seems to disappear on you in the early fall, all hope is not lost. So what I've found in running these trail cameras over all these properties for, who knows, 15, 20 years now, is that about half of the bucks here in farm country of the Midwest, about half of them have a separate fall and winter range than where they spend their summer. So in other words, in the summertime, they'll be in their bachelor group. Early fall, about the time they're shedding velvet, that bachelor group will break up and those bucks will shift to different parts or different range, if you will. Some of those bucks will stay, pretty close to where they summered, but about half of them are going to disperse to other parts of their range. So what I've noticed is that oftentimes when a mature buck is part of a bachelor group and he's got a separate fall-winter range from where he summered, a lot of times that buck will make a return trip or two back to his summer range. And what's really interesting is the timing of these return trips, or these homecoming trips I call them. Very early in the rut, somewhere around November 5th to the 8th, and it's very specific. Right before the does are really coming into heat, the bucks are getting more anxious each and every day. And I think what happens is a buck has moved to that fall-winter range and he's searching for hot does within that range, and if he can't find one, I think a lot of times what he does is he runs back to where he summered in hopes of finding a hot doe. It's an area he's familiar. He's not going into unfamiliar territory. He's going into an area he's familiar with, but he's making a run back to look for a hot doe. And usually those return trips to that summer range are very short in duration. They may happen overnight, where sunset, the buck gets up out of his bed and boom, he runs to his summer range, and before the sun comes up the next morning, he's back. May go 2 or 3 miles and then back 2 or 3 miles. Other times he may stay for a day or two, but rarely is it much more than about 48 hours. So the lesson here is very simple. If you had a buck that you was watching through the summer, and then early in the fall he dispersed and went to his fall-winter range, there's a very specific window, actually 2 windows, when he's going to return. The first of those windows is very early in the rut, about November 5th through the 8th. And it's very tight. That's a very tight window, because after the 8th, he can find hot does in his fall-winter range. But he returns back for a very short visit to that summer range. The second time he does it is at the very tail end of the rut, around Thanksgiving period. And I think just the opposite happens of what happened on that earlier visit. So he's been in that fall-winter range and he's been chasing hot does, breeding does throughout the peak of the rut. And as that rut starts winding down, them hot does become harder to find. So what's he do? If he's between hot does, he can't find one there in his fall-winter range, a lot of times he will run back to that summer range for a very brief visit to see if he can find a hot doe there. So if you had a buck that disappeared on you, you got 2 opportunities when you really have a good chance to catch him. They're very brief, but very early in the rut, very late in the rut, you can catch those homecoming bucks. So I want to give you a real-life example from my own experience of a buck that's done exactly what I'm telling you here. This particular buck, as you're going to see from trail camera pictures, was a really nice big 10-pointer. He spent his summer in a bachelor group on a property that only had about 8 to 10 acres of cover, a real small patch of cover, but it was surrounded by big ag fields. And those bucks would stay in that cover during the day and venture out into those ag fields to feed at night. But then every year, early fall, that bachelor group would break up and these bucks would scatter. A couple of them would stick around and still use that small patch, you know, as part of their fall range. But most of the bucks in that group would disperse to separate fall-winter ranges. Well, I would keep about 3 to 4 trail cameras in this small patch of cover throughout hunting season, throughout the fall and winter, because I was trying to pick up on a pattern with this big buck that I might be able to take advantage of and kill him. And this was before I totally put all the pieces together to this homecoming bucks idea. On this particular year, you're going to notice that this buck comes back to the property on November 6th and November 29th. Twice he comes back, and it's exactly what I'm telling you. Really early in the rut, really late in the rut, this buck comes back. I did not have a single picture of that deer between the 6th and the 29th. And with 3 cameras or 4 cameras, I can't remember now, but there was at least 3 or 4 cameras in that small patch of cover. If he would have returned, there's a very, very good chance I would have got his picture. But I didn't. He only came back on the 6th, he came back on the 29th, and here's the real key. If you had a buck disperse on you like this, both times that buck came back was in daylight, as you can see in these pictures. A bow hunter that didn't give up, that was persistent, and even though his buck dispersed and left, you could have killed that buck on the 6th or the 29th, as evidenced by these pictures. So don't give up if you have a buck disperse. Now I want to throw in one other disclaimer here. A lot of times when these bucks return to their summer home, they do it at night, and a lot of times I'll get a buck's picture one time, it's at night, and that's it. I don't see him again during the entire rut. A lot of times he only comes back early, and maybe, you know, late in the rut, maybe he had plenty of hot does where he moved to. So you just never know. But the idea here is that just because a buck dispersed and moved on you does not mean that you have no chance at all. You just need to be really persistent very early in the rut, very late in the rut, and you still have a chance.